Good afternoon, folks. Thank you for joining in, and I hope you find this interesting. This is a speculative piece of presentation about a project in which I've been involved for quite a long time. Learning Away was an initiative initially set up by the Paul Hamlyn Foundation back in 2008. And after 2 years of preparation and piloting, was a 5-year project to engage schools, primary and secondary schools, in using residential experiences. They had a particular approach to how residential experiences should be included in the life of a school. They wanted them to be integrated with the curriculum. They wanted them to be during the school week or the school term, not outside of the school term. They wanted them to be inclusive, so all the young people got to go, and they wanted them to be led by the teachers, maybe supported by specialists, and they wanted them to be progressive so that people had a series of residential experiences over their time at school, preferably moving from primary into secondary as well. There were 13 clusters of schools, some all primaries, some primaries and secondaries, some just groups of secondaries across Scotland and England. And for 5 years, we worked with them to develop the programs that met these criteria and then to evaluate what the impacts of that were on students, both cognitive and non-cognitive impacts, on staff in terms of their skills and their approach to teaching and learning, both in the classroom as well as on the residential, and also to the school ethos, the culture of the school, because one of the things we noticed quite early on is that once residentials were such an inclusive part of the school, they had quite a big impact on culture of the school overall. That completed in 2017 with lots of reports and some great findings. One of the things we didn't feel confident to make claims about was impact on attainment. We had a theory of change that emerged from the work that suggested that that the residentials led to changes in behaviour between pupils and teachers, that those changes in behaviour led to big enhancements in engagement in learning in the classroom, particularly amongst those who are low achievers, but right across the board as well. And we had some evidence that the impact of that enhanced engagement had an impact on attainment, but we weren't able to get all the data we wanted from the schools to really assess that properly. So a second phase was developed on which this presentation is based, simply to look more closely at whether attainment was affected by residential experiences. We worked with primary schools from Wigan, year sixes, in 8 primary schools in Wigan, and it was a comparative study where 4 of the schools had their SATs tests and all their Progress 8 scores, all the work that they did during the year was impacted by a residential earlier in the year, at the beginning of year 6, and the other 4 schools had the residential after SATs, so that the residential itself had no impact on their Progress 8 and SAT scores, which was one of our key sources of data. I don't know if you're ready to share the screen, Sally, but now will be a good time. Hey.
Hi, Chris. I'm just waiting for it to finish scanning, and then I will share it as soon as I possibly can. Sorry for the delay.
It's all right. I thought it had just popped up, but it hadn't. It was my PowerPoint coming up. So you have the background there. The study was set up primarily to, with the support of the Council for Learning Outside the Classroom and the Paul Hamlyn Foundation, who funded it, try and influence the Education Endowment Fund, who have a toolkit, which many of you might be familiar with, in which outdoor and adventurous activities are listed and score very well as an intervention that makes a difference to attainment. But the outdoor education field has always wanted that heading to be more discriminating about what sorts of outdoor and adventurous learning, and in particular residential experiences. So we were trying to get the Education Endowment Fund to give us a residential experiences line in their toolkit. And they said to us, well, take it seriously. If you can give us some small scale study that shows an impact, then we will consider doing a large scale study and taking that forward. So this was partly to influence policy by having an impact on the Education Endowment Fund's research agenda, and then subsequently their advice to schools. This all took place in 2018 and 19. But we didn't just look at attainment, we did look at non-cognitive skills, and we did do a lot of observation, follow-up focus groups and interviews, so it was a mixed methods approach. I'll rush through the results on attainment because they aren't particularly exciting. But once we get the data up, I can do that for you. What's more interesting, I think, is the things that we noticed that both pupils and teachers were doing as part of the residential experience, and which they valued as part of the residential experience, that were not about attainment. That's the main area where I'd like to, I hope we could perhaps engage in some discussion. Sally, you still look engaged in sorting that PowerPoint out then.
Yeah, sorry, I'm almost there, Chris. I'm almost there, I'm hoping.
Right. I'll tell you, the research was done from Ambleside. It was led by me, but most of the work was conducted by Jane Dudman as the research assistant. And then later on, a lot of the quantitative findings were crunched by Carrie Hedges, who's a PhD student as well as a research assistant that's been working with us. Wow, this looks promising.
No, I think it might be. I think it might be my PowerPoint. I'm really sorry.
It is.
For tomorrow. Yeah, it is. I'm really, really sorry, people. I need to get rid of that. Sorry. Oh, stop presenting. Right. I'm really sorry, Chris. I think there might be some permissions that mean that I can't. I've got your PowerPoint in front of me, but I can't seem to get it up on the screen. I'll try another thing. So if you're able to keep talking, I'm really sorry about this.
I'll just talk through the first few slides quite happily, because they are quite boring, and they weren't going to be the main focus anyway.
Okay.
So let's have a look at. I'll have a look at the results on progress and attainment, and share, because they are quite straightforward. We measured at 3 time points during the year for surveys, but for the rest of the quantitative data on progress and attainment, we took the data from the schools at the standard point where they did progress 8 checks, which was half-termly in these schools, October, December, February, April, and then into June, and then the SAT scores, which we collected from the schools after the academic year was over, and they had them and were able to share them with us in September. There was no discernible impact on progress or attainment between the 2 groups, the schools who had the residential early in the year and the schools who had it at the end of the year. Our analysis of that, which was what the teachers actually have been telling us all along, was that particularly the SATs scores are too coarse to capture much of the change in attainment that takes place in year 6. The majority of their pupils are already at the top of the scale, and so can't show any further attainment beyond that. Those that are not move within a category, but not across categories more often than not, and that isn't captured by the SAT scores. The other thing that became evident, especially in talking with teachers and the observations we were making and talking with students about their experiences on residentials, was that Progress 8 and SAT scores primarily test for knowledge acquisition. And unless a residential is actually targeted at a body of knowledge, of course, in this case, literacy and numeracy, then they're not likely to make an impact on knowledge acquisition. Where they do impact, and impact significantly, according to the teachers, is on knowledge understanding and knowledge application, which are not actually captured by the measures that we were using. So first thing is, we were using the wrong instruments if we wanted to look at a broader concept of what attainment actually could be and how it's understood by teachers. There was a lovely example of an instructor working with a group of students, 8 students, who are about to carry a canoe down to the water's edge, and just talking to them about, well, so do you think one of you could lift this canoe? And the students say, no way. So do you think 2 of you could lift the canoe? Well, maybe. How much will it weigh? What of you lifting it and 2 of you lifting it? And what if 4 of you lifted it? What if 8 of you lifted it? Let's have a go at that. And just getting the students to apply their understanding of fractions and so on to the task of getting the canoe to the edge of the water and getting them to work it through and then experience the difference between 2 of them lifting, 4 of them lifting, 8 of them lifting in terms of the weight that they were handling. And the schools told us, the teachers told us, that they come to this outdoor centre, this particular outdoor centre that they all used, because the staff have this capacity. They're all ex-teachers. They know how to work the experiences to make something of it from the curriculum point of view. Other centres don't have that capacity because the staff aren't experienced as teachers and don't have that background. We did do non-cognitive surveys, as I said, at 3 touch points, 3 time points. And in this area, the non-cognitive area, along with other studies that have been done, including our earlier Learning Away study, there were significant differences around a lot of non-cognitive outcomes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of them had significant difference. Cooperative teamwork, internal locus of control, leadership ability, open thinking, quality seeking, social effectiveness, stress management, and several more had strong indications of impact: active involvement, coping with change, overall effectiveness, self-confidence, self-efficacy, time efficiency. And there were lots of stories that teachers and students could tell on the bones of what those actually meant in concrete terms and the behaviour of the students on the residential. There are some areas where there was no change, just 2. Self-perception of academic performance, given that the schools were not trying to put across any curriculum content on these residentials. All of that was circumstantial. That's not surprising. And external locus of control, which is something that actually we hoped would go down rather than up, because we were anticipating impact on internal locus of control. So that's actually a good outcome. And girls did better than boys in cooperative teamwork and open thinking, which is something that might be worth exploring a bit further. But the boys didn't do better than the girls in anything. So our interpretation then, to sum up, progress and SAT scores are not useful. Hey, are we there?
Yay!
Sally, would you like to go to slide 9?
I will do my best.
Yeah, we're moving.
There we go. Can everybody see that? I'm not sure which slide 9 is.
Keep going. It's one with a photograph of 2 kids in front of a tent. First one with a photograph.
Okay,
there we
go. There.
So,
sorry about the delay, folks.
Oh, thanks so much for wrestling with that, Sally. I'm sorry I haven't managed to sort out security and privacy settings.
That's fine. Brilliant. Thank you,
I have
everybody.
Before. Why it hasn't happened? Teams and the world are mysteries. So progress, to sum up, progress and SAT scores are not useful research tools for assessing more broadly defined ideas of progress and attainment within a Year 6 primary school. The survey we used for the non-cognitive research, the rote block survey, confirmed previous research on the non-cognitive benefits of residential experiences and actually gave us a bit more detail into insights of that because of the comparative nature of the study. There was a particular impact on vulnerable young people, which I haven't mentioned before. The people on whom there was impact on attainment, the few that actually were impacted, and visibly so in the quantitative data, as well as in the non-cognitive data survey, were those who were unexpectedly vulnerable during Year 6. A sudden change at home typically would be, or a health issue. And the teachers described this as that the residential experience took them away from all of that concern for a week. And when they went back, the quality of the relationships that had changed with their pupil, with their peers and with the teacher gave them a steadying hand back in the classroom afterwards. So that instead of suddenly declining because of their focus of attention being drawn elsewhere, they managed to hold their course and stay with the class and keep their progress and their attainment moving forward. So that's an interesting insight for a particular subgroup. Okay, next one, Sally. So what else is going on? So summing up what we've said about knowledge, it's the residentials, unless they're particularly intending to transmit knowledge, they don't actually provide a lot of knowledge acquisition in relation to the curriculum. Obviously, there is knowledge about things going on at the residential centre, but not necessarily great relevance to the curriculum, unless you explicitly construct it in, which only one school did, which was in the context of geography. And so it didn't show up in the attainment work we were doing around literacy and numeracy. So structuring it in does get a result. It's important to say at this point that none of the schools set out, apart from this one school who had geography in their sites, none of the schools set out to have an impact on attainment or curriculum with the residentials. They all saw them as having a much broader value. Next slide, Sally. I think one of the things that certainly emerges both in the stories of the young people, the stories of the teachers, and indeed in the quantitative evidence is that every young person who goes on a residential experience may be engaging with the same landscape. By landscape, I'm using that as a metaphor for everything that goes on a residential experience, which is a very complex thing. The social side, the environmental side, the overnighting, the food, the friendships, the activities. There's a very, very complex landscape of experiences. And those are navigated more or less by the young people are taken by the hand by the instructors and the teachers. But again, there is quite a lot of agency even within that, especially in the non-formal times, the social times and the overnight times, but also in what happens in a canoe when you're on the water with 4 of your friends trying to make it go forwards and not tip over. So that every pupil is navigating that landscape slightly differently, making choices within that landscape, and the meaning that has for each pupil is quite different. So that there's a unique journey, and one of the things we feel is really important if residential experiences are really to offer a full picture of what it is that they contribute to education, is we need a survey tool, a research tool that describes that landscape and captures those individual journeys through that landscape in a mixed methods way. And that might be something worth some work. Okay, Sally. One of the other things that stood out in the data, which I've not noticed before, but when I went back to the early learning away data, stood out there too, once I'd started to look at it through this lens, is that quite a lot of assessment work is going on the residential. Teachers are assessing their pupils because they're seeing them in a new light and getting new knowledge about their students and their capabilities and how to work with them, how to have effective work relationships with them. The pupils are assessing their teacher and reassessing their teacher, and we call that, from the early learning away study, the I saw Miss in pyjamas effect, because suddenly the teachers become, my Miss is human, was one of the comments from one of the students. And of course, pupils are self-assessing. They're seeing themselves in a new light, seeing themselves suddenly being effective, being liked, being having leadership skills, having competence in the activities, whereas back at school they might have been judged in other ways for low performance or poor behavior or lack of attention or some other issue. So a lot of assessment is taking place. And that role is, I think, really important to highlight, because not all teachers go on residentials with their own pupils, and not many teachers, not all teachers from a school. Pupils are often sent off to a residential centre with just one accompanying teacher or two accompanying teachers who don't get involved in the activities. And so it's so important that ideally teachers get involved in the activities so that they are able to see all this going on and make those sorts of judgments and form those kinds of relationships to support the changes that take place that then persist back in the classroom, which causes this impact on engagement and changes in the teacher's confidence with new pedagogies and so on. Okay, thanks, Sally. Yeah. We've touched on that there's something here that we might discuss. There's one last thing that.
Do you want me to go back? Do you want me to go back to that slide before?
No, that's fine. We covered that.
Okay.
There was one thing that I did make me think that maybe it'd be interesting to do the research the other way around. All research up to now has looked at what is it that residential experiences offer to pupils and teachers back in the classroom. What difference, what impact does it make back in the classroom? Be very interesting to ask the question the other way around. What is it that goes on in the classroom that makes an impact to the quality of the residential experience? I say that for two reasons. One, because it would be great if schools had an insight into that so that they know how to do all the lead up to the residential in a more effective way. They probably have ways that they do that in many cases. But also, a lot of the data about why young people experience residentials as a place where knowledge understanding and knowledge application makes such a difference to their confidence and their internal locus of control and their leadership skills and their relationships and engagement with learning, is because it's the real world. And for them, surely education should be about preparing young people for the real world, and surely more education should be like the real world, like residential experiences. That's a long-term goal. It's a long time since many philosophers and academics have talked about deschooling and society and taking down the classroom walls. But I think there is something to be said for this context of application and understanding in the real world. And it would be interesting to reverse the question: how do schools support residential experiences, which is where the real learning takes place, rather than how do residential experiences support classrooms? That's over to you for discussion. That's over and out from me for now.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you so much. And sorry about the technical difficulties at the beginning. Finally got there with the PowerPoint. If I can work out how to, yes, I have. So maybe we could put some of the beginning slides up for people to, maybe the hypothesis bit, if people want to have a look at that. So while people are beginning to think about their questions, and please write them in the chat box, has anybody got a question immediately, or shall I just... I'll just ask a question while people are thinking. Thank you, Chris. That was really very, very interesting. And having been a primary school teacher myself many moons ago, I was interested in one of the things that you were saying about the teachers and teachers' involvement in the activities. I mean, have you over the years seen that there are fewer teachers being involved in, you know, sort of outward bound weeks or days? Are there fewer teachers being involved, and has the kind of like fear of risk assessment protocols you know, had an impact on that?
Yeah, Heather can probably contribute to that, to an answer to that question as well from her research. But from my perspective, we know that the number of schools going on residentials has plateaued in the last few years. Hasn't gone down very much. Well, there's a slight decline, but it might not yet be significant. Obviously, this isn't a year to assess that because COVID has stopped all residentials. But there certainly is a big change in schools not running their own residentials, but outsourcing them to providers. And therefore, the role of teachers can, but as this example shows, not necessarily not get so involved. The Learning Way experience, we required teachers to get involved. That was part of the approach. And clearly, a lot of teachers were nervous about that. There was some sort of reduction in teachers' willingness or ability or experience of this kind of thing, so they perhaps felt more nervous about it. They were very good at picking it up, and they got very enthusiastic about it when they gave it a go. And a lot of schools in the Learning Away project tried camping, buying their own camping equipment and setting up their own camps with no outside providers, because it was the best way to eke the money out. It was very low cost. And then they found that actually it wasn't just low cost, it was the best way to make an impact, because everything when you have a camp, everything's there for you. You've got to set up the camp, you've got to organize yourselves, you've got to set up the fire, you've got to cook the meals, you've got to think up some games. The whole thing just is natural. You don't have to have anything more than let's go camping. And there's just so much in that, and everybody's involved. And that, so many of them then came to like the idea of camping anew because of those experiences, but driven by cost initially.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Thanks, Chris. Has anybody else got any questions? I mean, maybe to do with the methodology that Chris talked about in gathering his data, maybe to do with, you know, this particular area, the outdoor learning, outdoor education. Anybody got anything that they would like to quiz Chris on? Any former teachers out there who've got an experience they'd like to share of working with their own classes and what was good about outdoor learning or bad? Kath, you're a teacher. Paula, you were a teacher. What? I'm going to pick on people in true teacher style.
I was just thinking something, but I could say it instead if you wanted, Sally.
You can say whatever you want, Paula. Go ahead.
Fast typer. Chris, I was just thinking about what you'd said about the not being able to evidence as much impact on the sort of academic attainment as you might have liked. And do you think that's anything to do with the length of time of the project? You know, because some of these non-cognitive skills do have an impact on cognitive ability, but maybe over a longer period of time, perhaps. Do you sort of, I was just typing, if you were to design your ideal research project, would it perhaps be over a longer period of time? I sort of think I think I remember your project from 2008, and I remember seeing videos of reception children camping in their classrooms and their playgrounds and things, and thinking how wonderful it was. I don't know if that was to do with that, but I remember there was a lot of talk about it at the time. And just sort of saving it for year 6 sort of seems a bit of a shame, really.
Yes, comparative studies have their limitations, that's for sure. And none of these schools were doing progressive residentials, in that this was the first residential that most of the students had ever done. Whereas in Learning Away, it would have been progressive, and this would have been their second or their third or even more in some cases. that all the schools were inclusive and were integrated, and they did it in the school time, and every child went, more or less. And so they had some features of the learning away model. I think, although I think over time, and certainly there were indicators from learning away that attainment is impacted over time, both in secondary, particularly in secondary, but also in areas outside of the SAT scores in primary, not just numeracy and literacy. And the evidence was, as soon as you threw in something like a poet, a creative writer into the residential, or a geography teacher into the residential, then you got knowledge acquisition. Certainly in way where we were paying literacy throughout, in particular, quite a few schools use creative writers and things like that to enrich the residential experiences. Storytellers and all sorts, and the impact that it had there was particularly on underachieving boys, who suddenly wanted to talk and write about their experiences, and that clearly had an impact on their attainment. There's a lovely story from one group of kids, boys and girls, in a Year 6 class, who are underachieving in terms of literacy. And after the residential, about a month later, their literacy score leapt several points on the Progress 8 score, several points. And the teacher had no idea why. And apparently there were two things that had gone on. The first was that they had learned how to work together on the residential, and they had applied those skills around their table in the classroom to pick their own literacy scores up. They were setting themselves spelling tests, they were setting themselves projects, they were marking each other's work, and all of this without the teacher's knowledge. So they set out to change their literacy scores. But what puzzled the teacher is that the children didn't know their literacy scores as far as she knew. She didn't tell them. But one of the other things they'd done on the residential was learn how to use tablets. Because they'd each been given a tablet to do various things with while they were on the residential, and they'd hacked into Mrs. Computer and got their literacy scores off her laptop while she was out of the classroom. And that's how they knew their literacy scores. Miss now has a password, but
classic unintentional.
Brilliant. What about internal locus of control? Brilliant. You know, like leadership, fantastic.
That's great. Thank you, Paula. Thank you, Chris. Kath, did you have a question?
It's not a question. It's the fact that it's really nice to actually hear this research going on. And I keep thinking, yeah, I did that when I was a head teacher, and we did that. And I had, in my 2 main schools, we had that progression of residential. And I have to stick my head out here and say, in Somerset, we actually started with Year 2 residential over a weekend when we took them to Slimbridge, and I took Year 2s and a few Year 3s in that mixed class I took. And the knock-on effect of that, staying in a youth hostel, was absolutely unforgettable. Suddenly to find these children and they're saying, right, you've had an early tea, going on somewhere special. In the minibus, off we go, 2 minibuses going down, and we went back to see the evening feed. And it was cold weather, and it was January, but they had all the swans there, and the children were just absolutely absorbed. And the specialist there gave them a special talk. We came back and we couldn't get them to bed because they were just absolutely buzzing. And we ended up where we were. There was a pond outside, and we ended up doing a count of identifying all the ducks on the pond and everything, and some children couldn't go to sleep, and we peeled them off one by one to put them back to bed. And some of the creative writing work we got there was absolutely amazing, and present that to parents. And that in that school went right through, and I took that model when I was a head in Lancashire and developed it. So we actually followed it through with Year 4 and then Year 5 and then Year 6. So when it came to the Year 5s, we looked at the area of river study from the geography point of view, which I was teaching, so that was handy, even though because I was teaching head of a 1-4 elementary primary school then. And we developed it with the down at Hodsall Lodge. if anybody knows that one. And we developed it, and one day, and I said, I want to take them right away from here, right away from where we are now. Can we go to Malham? And he said, of course we can. So we went up to Malham, and those children looked at, and the discussion and the richness of vocabulary they had, walking up from Janet's Foss and talking about how that was made, going up Goredale Scar, over the top to Malham Cove and down, literally blew their socks off. And they went back and they gossiped with parents to the fact that on the following Monday, because we came back on the Friday, on the Monday I had about 8 parents coming in. Mrs. Tyson, how did you manage to get me to get my walking boots on, and the whole family? And we walked all the way around the walk, those children did. And parents coming back saying, I didn't know we lived in such beautiful country, and it was so easy to get to, and we've learned about this and this. And the following year, I had the privilege, in a sense, and I say this truthfully, that my daughter was doing a geography degree at Durham, and she was doing a research program about for a dissertation on field work. So she used my school, she used a comparing school, so 2 church schools, both in Lancashire, one who did their analysis and we did an assessment before we taught the module. We talked about the rivers and the geography side, and then we did the field work, planned as we always did with Hothersall Lodge, came back, finished it off, and then we did a retest. The other school did their they did their input on it wasn't practical, it was all theory. They did the same tests, and they did that after SATs, and the results were absolutely they were fantastic from our point of view, because the recall of what the children had, and the gain of knowledge some of those children got. To this day, I still see 1 or 2 of them in Preston. They will come and say, do you remember that school trip? And I talk to my children about that, and you think, wow, you're making me feel old. But the knowledge was there, and they've got it. And parents say, oh, it's not the same school now. But we haven't got as many students, teachers or staff who are willing to give up that time.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, isn't it, Kath? Chris, did you want to make any comment on any of that? Thank you, Kath.
I could comment on loads of that, but I'll narrow it down.
I know.
Kath, you probably know Kilve Court then.
I am. That's me, because I did an environmental studies degree.
Right. Well, Kilve Court's where I had my first residential experience as a teenager. So
yeah,
I went to school in Cheddar and Wells. We were very surprised in Learning Away at the number of primary schools that said we want to start with year 2, which is brilliant, because we didn't expect them to do that. We expected maybe year 4 best, and it was brilliant what they came up with and what they did. And the progression point that Kath's making is really important. I remember that the photograph of the tent that you saw, the sort of bell tent in which 8 kids sleep. I remember a primary school that used those, and the year 2s and 3s went Farmers Field just down the road kind of thing. And of course they couldn't put it up. It was too big, too heavy. They didn't know how. So they watched the teachers put it up, and they might hold a rope here and do that bit. And then a year later, they go back and they know what to do. And they remember it, as you say. They remember because of the application of the knowledge, not just watching, but getting involved. And they help to put it up. The next year they direct the putting up of it, but the teacher might still have to come in and put the central pole up for them because it's too heavy. The next year they can do the whole thing without the teacher supervising them. And then in year 6, they're teaching the year 2s. And the kids who went through that progression would quite openly say that it's fantastic, because we can see how if we persist at something, we learn how to do it, and now we can do it for ourselves. And if we can do that with a tent, we can do that with our maths. And they said that, not me or the teacher. They said that. Exactly. So in terms of their confidence and their application and the transference of that belief that if it's difficult, we can still persist, and we'll get there. That's quite significant, especially for low achieving young people.
That's a really interesting point, isn't it? I'm just wondering if anyone else wants to come in there. Thank you, Kath and Chris. Very interesting part of the discussion. Anybody else want to come in? I was just thinking about Pippa, in terms of your growth mindset. I don't know whether you're still there. I know you've had a bit of trouble with internet recently, but it seemed to me to speak out to growth mindset, what Chris has just been describing.
Yeah, that wasn't. I was actually thinking about some elements of the transferal that he was talking about in terms of achievement goal setting and kind of focusing on self-challenge. And it was reminding me of some of the kind of challenge by choice stuff that I've done in development training settings with adults for those transferable skills of being able to consider how to challenge yourself and have frameworks to challenge yourself by that could then be transferred really well into classroom settings. I know certainly I use a lot of relationship between physical activity, so developing perseverance and encouraging children to consider their own goal setting structures. It also, it kind of, and having Paula in here as well, I don't know if she would want to comment on this, but I've done quite a bit of work using philosophy for children in the outdoors, because that's my kind of pedagogical background, if you like, and we took a lot of that learning outdoors, and so it was using the outdoors as a landscape for thinking and playing with thought, and that was quite a I suppose cognitively again an effort to transfer back into the classroom, but just needed that deliberate transferal, I think. And I guess those bridging transferal activities are perhaps for all those different areas of perhaps what's possibly important.
Yeah, certainly from the learning away perspective, the first study, what transferred back pedagogically was typically collaborative learning strategies. That teachers were much more comfortable trusting that the children would get on with something if they were asked to get on with it, and would work together and knew how to work together to support each other in something that was collaborative, but whether that was in the classroom or in the school playground or in the grounds. I should have said that the impact on the Education Endowment Fund was kind of upstaged, because before our results came out, they decided to go ahead with a big study with Outward Bound and also a non-residential provider, which is currently underway, paused at the moment for obvious reasons. And that was particularly to look at the impact of growth mindset in a residential setting and in a non-residential outdoor setting on attainment. And actually not just attainment, on attainment and well-being. They were looking at both. So certainly Outward Bound have really bought into the growth mindset concept, and all their facilitators are sort of indoctrinated into it.
I think I saw a presentation given up at Ambleside by somebody involved in that research at some point a couple of years ago. Yeah,
possibly Kate O'Brien. Yeah,
it was. Yes, yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's great. Thank you, Pippa. Thank you, Chris. Has anyone else got a question? Dave, Harvey, Anna, Benjamin? I don't know who else. Anybody want to ask a question?
No questions. I was sort of involved from a very different perspective with the research, because I was head of centres for the Wigan centres, and so the schools, I put all the schools together, and so it was a very interesting perspective to be looking from. This was before I started my PhD, so I was very much looking at this from, well, this is what we do, and this is how this has come about, and the research was looking at it from a different angle. So it was an interesting sort of meeting of minds, if you like, or meeting of perspectives. So it's interesting to see how the research has turned out. But yeah, apart from that, no questions.
I think one thing to maybe to follow up there, just because bring back residentials into the frame, one of the questions we asked, what difference do the residentials make over non-residential experiences of a similar nature? And we did get insights into that. The informal time in the evenings and overnight and between activities Somebody else mentioned is really important to the relationship building and the agency that pupils feel, and the creativity that they engage in, and the deep learning, the retelling of stories and the revisiting of experiences. But I think the emotional intelligence side, somebody picked up on emotional intelligence and emotional language skills. One of the schools wanted to focus on emotional language because they felt their children didn't have enough for their age. That I remember watching them doing a very schooly orienteering activity, which was very organized and regimented. And of course, orienteering doesn't actually draw out emotional language from people, it's functional. But there was always a group behind the teacher who were waiting their turn. And they started to occupy themselves with creative activities. They actually built a nest for a phoenix in the autumn leaves together. And it was full of emotional richness and creativity. And I commented on this to the organising teacher, saying that was great, seeing that going on. Your kids don't have any problems with emotional language. You're just not giving them the situations where they can use it. She said, whatever you do, don't tell the teacher that, because he would be desperate to think that there were children in his group that weren't gainfully occupied for every minute of the activity.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
3 years later, that teacher had completely relaxed.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it?
Learn to trust the experience.
I'm just aware of the fact that there are only about 5 minutes left. Paula has asked a question in the chat box, but I just want to give Anna an opportunity. Was there anything you wanted to say, Anna, or don't feel you have to?
No, thank you. My dissertation is actually going to be working with Chris about residentials for. Sorry, Chris, I hope I was allowed to say that.
Yes, of course.
Working, about the value of residentials, but relating that, because my degree is geography, to place and how place might be affected. The children's views of place by going on a residential, how that may then make them feel about the place that they return home to. So I found it really interesting. Thank you.
One of the really interesting things about Hannah's question is she's not just interested about the place that children go on their residential. She's also asking the question, and how does that change their understanding of the place where they live, because they've been away? And I thought that was a really interesting a question to ask. So it's exciting to be supervising Anna on that.
That sounds really good. Paula had one.
Don't worry if we haven't got time. I just was sort of trying to.
There was no insight from the second study on relation to that. In the first study, we did do some work surveying parents in some of the clusters where the schools were willing to do that with us. And one of the studies actually was a family intervention project where families were taken on residentials where the children were in danger of dropping out of school. We took the whole families away on a series of 3 residentials as a single family unit with staff, and that was such an interesting project. We did a PhD study on that done by Kate Breeze with us, and so do look at that if you're interested. It'll be in our repository, Kate Breeze and family interventions.
Thank you. I think just one observation I had about P4C, which Pippa was talking about, was that one of the things that P4C does or tries to do is to get children to think for themselves. That's the sort of one of their noble aims. But I also think that these residentials and P4C, they have quite a sort of a subversive role in a sense, because they require the teachers to trust the children, like you said, to sort of trust them to be able to solve some problems, to be able to sort some things out. And I think that sort of the scourge of over-parenting that a lot of children have, and also now the curriculum being so spoon-fed, there just isn't the space in a lot of these children's lives to be able to sort of have that downtime. I know we talk about it a lot, but to have that downtime where you're going to develop some of these skills. So, I mean, I've worked at schools, well, actually mainly sort of schools with high areas of disadvantage, where the sort of a lot of parents think that they're being a good parents by being overly protective over their children. And actually they're really holding them back. So the freedom that the children get on these residentials really sort of shows them in a way what they're capable of, that they've never been able to sort of discover for themselves. So I just think That's quite interesting, really. I had to actually wrestle a child off a mum once when I was a head in Manchester, because I don't think the boy had ever been from his street, let alone, you know, from Openshaw. And, you know, it was a risk, because if he'd had a terrible time, it would have been my fault. But he had a wonderful time, and he was the first one on the bungee jump and the first one in the piranha pool, etc., and absolutely loved it. And we were really aware that that had really opened up his mind, and his mum was holding him back.
I think that's a really important point, actually, and there's a lot more could be done with the impact of residentials on parenting, on families, as well as on schools, because parents do notice a big difference when they come back into the family, and parents can get, as you're describing there very well, can very much get in the way, and there are ways of. And there's an impact on the parent. For a lot of parents, it's the first time they've been without their child in the house, and that has emotional impact for lots of parents, lots of mums in particular.
Especially if you're a single mum,
yeah,
you know, and this was this role of this mum. She was just, that was their life, the two of them together. And if she lets him go, I mean, more than that as well, you know, if she lets him go, he may discover that there's her, which I think is a big fear for some mums.
We've also noticed that in parallel work we've done with adults in care. You get the same thing, but in the relationship between the carer and the person being cared for. And the carer, the person being cared for, is often far more capable than the carer will allow them to be in the care situation. But in the outdoor situation, they can demonstrate that because the carer is not in power, doesn't have control. And then they go back in with that knowledge. And some carers then say, wow, I didn't realize I can help that to flourish. And other carers say, oh no, I'm going to shut that down as quick as possible because I don't want that going on and have to look after it. So, you know, and that same can happen, I guess, with parents and with teachers, of course.
And with teachers, yeah, definitely. It's control, isn't it, I suppose. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Paula. Thank you, Chris. I was just about to bring Heather in, and she's just texted something. Heather, do you want to just have the final say before we close, and Chris?
Yeah, thank you very much, Chris. Very interesting as usual. I suppose from an outdoor learning theme perspective, one of the things I would like to say is that Learning Away study and all the subsequent research and the connected research that we've done with teachers and primary schools, particularly in terms of their enabling children to have outdoor learning experiences, including residentials, has formed part of our impact case study for the REF, the Research Excellence Framework, which is looking really, really positive, because not only is there impact in the UK, Chris and myself, we've both done quite a lot of work across the world, really, and we're now getting testimonials and policy that evidence that's been developed in other countries as a result of the Learning Away and the subsequent work we've done, the research. So that is fantastic. We know the really positive outcomes and the challenges of actually putting things into practice, but it has really been quite important. It's now quoted in a lot of the government documents, both in the sort of DES and Scottish Government as well, in terms of why we need residentials, because at the moment many of the residential centres are unable to operate and are facing considerable financial challenges. So that's come up in the news quite a lot. Yeah, so thank you for the opportunity, Sally, for Chris to present, and really important research.
No, absolutely fantastic. Chris, do you want to just say a sentence and then I'll close? Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to acknowledge the work that went into this from Jane Dudman, from Carrie Hedges, and from Dave in his former life in carrying out this research and helping, you know, and breaking the back of the research effort and helping us come to these findings. So it was a team effort.
Thank you. And can I just ask everybody to thank Chris very much indeed. That's been really, really interesting. Some very rich discussion there. So thank you everyone for And also, again, thank you to Chris and Heather. And if anybody has not made themselves known to Heather, please do so, because this is, as I say, one of our 3 themes, the outdoor learning. And Chris has got his own theme in CNPPA, the Centre for National Parks and Protected Areas. So it's something that is university wide. And just to reiterate what Heather was saying, her impact case study has been graded very, very highly and has been commended. So that's really good news for our REF, for those of you who know about the REF. So I'd just like to end by thanking everybody, particularly Chris, and for all of you for participating, and also remind you of Steve Chubb's talk on the 18th of November, and also more news will be coming shortly about our LED Learning, Education and Development Research Day on the 3rd of December. So thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon.